Michelle, I'll start with you. What are you hearing on the ground there?
Well, this is a city that has been traumatized on several levels. It's early in the morning. The city is just starting to wake up, and all over this city, there are thousands of ICE agents that are hanging out in front of places where people are starting to go to work, dropping their kids off at school, and where you might expect that the tactics that they use might tampen down a little bit in the wake of the shooting last Wednesday. They seem to be accelerating. They're ever more aggressive, more militaristic in their tactics. The weekend has been full of reports because they're monitored as they move around the city, so all of this is being captured on video. They're monitored, and reports of people being pulled out of their cars. In one case, they, guns drawn, broke into a home and took a family. And yet there are thousands of people. There are 11 different organizations that are working in the city of Minneapolis, another similar number in St. Paul and throughout the state, following them, trying to monitor what they're doing, blowing whistles and kazoos and horns to let people know when they're coming. So there's the deportations, which local people here call kidnappings, are continuing. And there's a real concern that Minneapolis is being used as a proving ground, that the Minnesotans are trying to hold the line because they worry that if this is acceptable here, if this is normalized here, this is something that all of America will have to get used to.
Michelle, I'm just wondering, we know that the Secretary Noem was sending more ICE officers into the area, suggesting that the fraud scandal that's taking place there needed more people to investigate it. But is the increased presence of ICE something that's visible?
It's very visible. You see it as you drive around the city. You see caravans moving around. You'll happen upon a deportation that's happening. You'll see them gathering in large numbers, I guess planning what they're next. We were at a gas station yesterday, and a group of them just pulled up right next to us. And so they're very visible. But what you said about them coming here to investigate fraud, people here are really curious about that because the fraud case is real. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Very real. A 10-year-old case. Most of the people involved in that case have already been convicted and are incarcerated. And many of the deportations that are taking place, the raids, they have nothing to do with fraud. They're well beyond the Somali community. They're all over the city and all over the state. So that may be the justification for coming in here, but most of the deportations don't seem to be directly attached to that. And there's a real concern here about the case of Renee Good and how that will be adjudicated. People are worried that the administration has already come to a conclusion on that. You see that in the statements that they've made in the release of video to the public, but not to local officials here who have a concomitant investigation. And so people here are worried that the system in some ways is broken, but that it may already also be fixed, that they've already come to a conclusion about what they think about that, and they've come to a conclusion about what they're planning to do in this state. There is an assumption that they're going to be here for at least 60 days. So this is a long-term presence here, a presence that for people here who are on the ground feels very much like a siege or an occupation.
MS Now senior contributing editor Michelle Norris, live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much for your reporting on the ground. Chris Matthews, I just want to get your gut feelings on what's happening. There are so many ways in which this ICE shooter very obviously, to anyone who can research law enforcement procedure, did not follow procedure, walking in front of the car, shooting at the car. But I want to ask you about the very quick coarsening of human emotions that are happening throughout the process of covering this. Seeing conversations online, on TV, podcasters, one who was even a lawyer, claims to be a lawyer, saying that this was a tragedy of her making, that she deserved to be shot in the face. And I'm trying to think of any scenario in which a 37-year-old mom driving a Honda Pilot with stuffies in the glove compartment deserves to be shot in the face from 1 to 2 feet away. Am I wrong to think that this is taking us down a very dangerous, dark hole?
Well, Meek, I haven't been on in a few days, so you're asking me about my gut reaction to what's going on in our country right now. And I have to tell you, I've tried so hard to be a journalist and to look at it objectively and just say it's not the sin, it's not the sinner, it's the sin, and to separate Trump from what he's been saying. But what he's been saying in just the last few days is incredible. He said all our elections are crooked as hell. All our elections in America, in our democracy, are crooked as hell. He said that in front of all these Republican senators and members of Congress, and not one of them raised any concern. How can he say that? All our elected officials are crooked? They all won through crooked elections? Is he serious? And they let him say it about our democracy? And then he talks about our friend Denmark. We're going to take away Greenland from them. This is a country that has been celebrating the 4th of July for us since 1912. They really like America. They support us in wars like in Afghanistan. They are a good friend of our country. And he now has the Prime Minister of Denmark saying we'll end up NATO if we go crash in there and take that country. This is completely out of hand, this presidency, completely out of hand. To say our democracy is a joke, to talk about killing our alliance with NATO, to say that NATO is not causing any threat to Russia. The reason Russia hasn't invaded Europe is because of NATO. It's unbelievable. And this traffic situation, anybody who saw that woman, Miss Good, anybody who saw her comment to the police, to the ICE official, saw that she was friendly. She was not causing trouble. She did not want to cause a fight. And they shot her in the face. It's unbelievable. She was not aiming her car. Everybody in America can see her turning the wheel to the right, as Joe said in that statement there, all to the right. She clearly was trying to avoid that guy. And then to kill her like that, just kill her. Democracy, freedom of individuals, our alliances in the world are all up for grabs under this president. And I do not like attacking him personally, but he's doing it. Donald Trump is destroying our democracy. It's unbelievable. And you know why? Because he wants to screw around with the 26 elections. He wants to find some way to screw around with them. He tried to get Brad Raffensperger to give him 12,000 votes in Georgia. Pam Bondi said, before they even counted the absentee ballots, he said Trump won Pennsylvania in 2020. No, he didn't. He lost it. And it's incredible. He's making there's no word for it. It's awful what he's doing. It's every aspect of our lives now.
You know, Chris, there are two ways to look at this. And one of the ways to look at it is what the president is doing. And that's what we've all been focused on for a very long time. I love American democracy. I love our constitutional republic. I have faith. I have faith in the people. I have faith in Americans. I have faith in the courts. And I have faith that we are going to have elections in 2026. And I also can guess, because Donald Trump knows he can read the poll numbers, that things are collapsing for the Republican Party in large part because of the sort of tactics that Kristi Noem is doing, that he's trying to do right now the same exact thing that Chris Christie said he was trying to do in the spring of 2020 when he started trying to undermine faith and confidence in American democracy. Imagine that. Having the honor to live in this constitutional republic, and my gosh, it's extraordinary. You could be an immigrant chased out of Poland. You could come to America. You could run U.S. foreign policy. That story is repeated, and can be considered, as Ed Luce's book points out, one of the greatest geopolitical thinkers of our time, responsible in large part, ask the ex-Soviet generals, for bringing down the Soviet Union, according to the ex-Soviet generals. That's only in America. That only happens here, and that could be repeated a million times over. That story is repeated a million times over. So having the honor to be a leader in that country and trying to undermine faith in American democracy in front of a group of senators, that's extraordinary. More extraordinary? Not a single United States senator who's a Republican, Jonathan Lemire, speaking out, going, you know what? I believe in America, and I believe in American democracy. And Mr. President, the fact of the matter is, elections have been getting more accurate, not less, every year that we move forward. In fact, the 2020 election, the president's own people said the safest, the most secure, the fairest, the most accurate election in the history of elections. So if you look at what happened in Minneapolis and you see Republicans justifying the shooting of a mother in the face from point blank range, if you look at these Republican senators not speaking out, you ask, what's the purpose of being a senator if you can't speak out when your country needs you the most? And I will say on Greenland, one of the reasons I love this country so much is because of the checks and balances that it has shown in difficult times. And we saw it during the 2016 election challenges. 63 federal judges, many of them Trump appointees, many of them Republican appointees, saying no to the lies. All of the lies that continue to be fed and swallowed whole by many people in the MAGA base. 63 judges said no. There was no widespread election fraud. And even Alito and Thomas said in Pennsylvania, there may have been some problems, but certainly nothing that would have changed the outcome of the election. There you have that. And now you have the Supreme Court blocking the president from sending troops to police American cities, to militarize American cities, to do the thing that he said in front of all those generals and admirals back in September. We want you to practice your war tactics, basically, on American cities and on U.S. citizens. The court said, no, can't do that. And then look at what Republicans are starting to say on Venezuela and the War Powers Act. They're forcing a vote. And I have confidence in those Republicans that have stayed quiet far too long, that if the president pushes too hard on Greenland, if he pushes too hard on a NATO ally, Jonathan, enough Republicans will step up and do the right thing and understand protecting the NATO alliance that took down the Soviet Union is more important than not pissing off a few people in his MAGA base. We'll see what happens, but those are the stakes that are laid out. So we can look at Donald Trump. We need to look at those who have enabled him for far too long and not put up political boundaries that every other president has put up.